Scott, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Chris. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. Um, when we spoke last week, well, first off, thanks for being patient and getting all this set up, and wanted to do this last week, but we finally got it on here. It was my screw up, but I really wanted to get you on here because number one, you're friends with Melissa, have been for a long time. We worked together to help you and your wife get your place a couple years back. But from what I've seen of what you've done in your career over the past couple of years, you've really launched and really grown. And so number one, I really just love the fact that you have a lot of passion for what you do. And you're really dialed into it. You help a lot of people. And it's clear that, you're an expert, like a real expert in what you're doing. And it's nice to talk to someone that's a legitimate expert in their field in a day where there's so many people that are armchair therapists and armchair, experts in whatever they think they're an expert in. So, and what I wanted us to talk about is something that's really important right now. We're going through this time, and this is Mental Health Awareness Month of May. I know that personally I have gone through the ups and downs of all the emotions that this quarantine can bring. I know a lot of people are struggling, and that I know, and there's people struggling all over the place, but there is hope, and there are ways to help yourself. And I wanted to talk to you just to get an idea of what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, some of the conversations that, or some of the ways that you're helping people get through this time, give some advice, some suggestions, and, really talk about you and your profession and your background, man. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
So my name's Dr. Scott Giacomucci, and I'm a fellow of the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress. I primarily work with clients that have experienced trauma, addiction, grief and loss, or death. And I also do a lot of teaching and training and supervising and a bit of writing and research as well. So all of it's about trauma and trauma therapy, but I'm coming at it from different angles as
Right.
as a writer, as a researcher, as a clinician, and as a teacher.
Yeah.
And of course, society right now is in the midst of a collective trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Probably unlike anything that most of us, at least in the United States, have ever experienced in our life.
Right.
It's interesting because when I talk to colleagues in other countries, they tell me, we're very familiar with collective trauma. We know how to handle this. Maybe we're a little bit more resilient than some of you in America because we're not used to experiencing collective trauma.
Right.
But this is different because everyone around the world, more or less, is experiencing similar things.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you talk about collective trauma, kind of explain what that is.
Yeah. So, the way that trauma is usually defined is as an experience that overwhelms somebody's ability to cope.
Mm.
And usually there's an element of powerlessness, of helplessness, and often it results in disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's an experience of an individual or an experience of a group or a family, or in this case, a society.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about this pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
there's a huge sense of powerlessness and helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to stop it or prevent it, on a larger scale at least?
Mm-hmm.
And it's inherently disconnecting because of the way we have to respond to it with social distancing.
Right.
So it creates a sense of helplessness and of disconnection, which are really characteristic of any type of trauma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's little things that we can do to have a sense of power in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Real simple things like creating structure,
Mm-hmm.
waking up at the same time every day,
Mm-hmm.
giving yourself choices, exercising power in little things like
Mm-hmm.
cooking yourself dinner rather than ordering takeout all the time.
Right.
Anything you can do to feel a little bit more powerful and feel like you have a little bit more control over your day
Mm-hmm.
without putting other people in harm of course,
Right.
can be helpful for your mental health. Going
Yeah.
for a walk.
Yeah.
Anything related to movement in the body as well. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, one thing that's become really apparent with all the new neuroscience research, especially,
Mm-hmm.
is how trauma impacts the body and the nervous system. I mean, almost all of the symptoms of PTSD have to do with the nervous system, right?
Okay.
So anything we can do to get our nervous system in action so it can release some of this pent up energy
Yeah.
can be really helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
when we talk about responses to trauma, we normally think about fight, flight, and freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And fight and flight only really work if there's someone to run away from or
Right.
something to fight back. In
Right. Right. Right.
this case, the threat's invisible.
Yeah. And that's the crazy part, is that you have all of these natural instinctive reactions to the environment and the circumstances, but there's no practical way to express your instinctive response. So I know, like you were saying, when it comes to moving, it's odd because all those feelings come together, and depending on the individual, I guess you're going to respond to that feeling in a certain way. I know it can almost feel like pressure, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
for me, if I don't move, it literally makes me sit still, you know, because it's almost overwhelming. And that feeling day after day after day can, I'm assuming, just bring along a lot of, I mean, I don't know, prolonged trauma, depression, anxiety, and awkward and odd behavior, you know?
Yeah, yeah, like we can really get stuck.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's almost like a sense of learned helplessness, which is really interesting. They studied learned helplessness in dogs,
Mm.
where they would put them in a situation where they couldn't escape,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they would shock them electrically. I don't think this would be ethical now.
Right.
And the dogs would just kind of roll over and not try to escape because they learned that they were helpless.
Right.
And then they would redo the experiment with the dogs having an opportunity to escape. But because they had learned they were helpless, they didn't try to help themselves. They just took it.
Right.
And coincidentally, the founder of positive psychology was the one who was involved in that research.
Right.
But
Right.
we do the same thing, especially when we experience prolonged trauma, prolonged neglect, prolonged poverty, even, or
Mm.
prolonged helplessness of any kind. And I think that's really relevant with the pandemic right now.
Prolonged helplessness. And the thing is, given the fact that here in Pennsylvania, we're dealing with this, I guess we're about 6 weeks in, maybe a little bit more. Throughout the span of a lifetime, that's not a lot of time.
Right.
So, yeah, it's amazing how this brief period of time can have such an impact on a lifetime, or how you respond immediately coming out of this. I mean, I don't know what the science is obviously behind this, but I mean, you know, how does that work in a mind where you've been conditioned to living this way for so long? You're automatically put into a powerless or, you know, helpless feeling, you know, situation, and how that can just, I guess, within different people manifest itself, and they can, some people, like I said, fight to work and do all those things that you were saying, and you know, other people can just kind of sit and stay stuck and get sick. I mean, are you kind of genetically predisposed to responding one way or another?
Um, it's hard to say. I mean, I think people believed things were much more genetic than they actually are.
Yeah.
The field of epigenetics is very interesting, describing
Mm.
how genes are activated based on experience.
Okay.
So even our genetic structure is impacted by experiences that we have in the world.
Right.
So it's a lot more nurture than it is nature, at least
Yeah.
based on how people used to talk about things.
Right.
Although nature, of course, plays a major role in it. I mean, I think your question is about why do some people respond some way to trauma and other people respond other ways, and it's probably more complex of an answer than I can give.
Yeah. Right.
Taking into account all sorts of risk factors, protective factors, past experiences, perspectives, culture, strengths. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. Some simple answers that kind of shed light on a piece of this. I mean, one thing I noticed with my clients, we'll start there because that's what I'm observing directly.
Right.
Some people have experienced past traumas that remind them that the pandemic reminds them of.
Right.
Whether it's a past medical trauma or living in a different country during a collective trauma, or a prolonged period of disconnection, abandonment, or neglect. These past traumatic memories can really be triggered right now, leading to an increased sense of hyperarousal or dissociation or overwhelming feelings. I mean, there's a Buddhist trauma therapist that I really like, Epstein. He suggests that somebody's experience of something as traumatic has less to do with the actual trauma and more to do with whether or not they had somebody that was present and attuned to them with love and compassion after the trauma. So I think this is important to remember. If we can stay connected to people who are loving and compassionate and care about us throughout this time, we're less likely to experience it as traumatic. And of course, it's harder to stay connected to people because of the social distancing guidelines. But there are ways to stay connected. Originally, I was really resistant to teletherapy and Zoom, and a lot of my clients and supervisees were really resistant to it. My students, we had to shift our classes onto Zoom. Most people were resistant to it, but we've been finding that there's ways to create authentic connection even through the internet.
Right.
And there's even some benefits and strengths to Zoom or teletherapy that things we can do that wouldn't have been possible person to person. There's also another important concept called post-traumatic growth, which is in some ways the opposite of post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic growth. And this is the phenomenon of growing as a result of difficulty or trauma.
Right.
And this phenomenon has been around forever. You can find it in any religious text, any historical story, any myth or legend. So, it's like the classic hero's journey story of somebody growing because of difficulty.
Sure. Every Marvel comic character ever created.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And more recently, psychologists have started to study it. And what they've actually found is that when somebody experiences trauma, they're statistically more likely to grow from it in some way than to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So 25% of adults that experience trauma develop PTSD, but 2 out of 3, that's 66%, experience growth in some way. That's close to 3 times as more likely, which is really hopeful.
It is. And from the one thing you mentioned there that I thought was really important is the value of maintaining connection during this time that we're in, however you can, and the people that you're connected with and the type of support that they give you during will determine how you handle it now, but also what your growth process will be moving out of it. And when we were talking the other day, I just think it's important to touch on. There are a lot of people that are in situations right now that are terrible, and they're confined in unhealthy environments and unhealthy relationships, abusive in all kinds of ways. And who knows? I mean, there might be somebody that watches this that isn't in that situation. So, how does that person handle that?
Yeah, that's a tough question too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the domestic violence rates have really increased because of the stay-at-home orders and the quarantining. I mean, for some people, it's a blessing because they're forced to be at home with their family and they have a loving family, and usually they're too busy to spend time together.
Yeah.
And for other people, it's creating more trauma than the pandemic even.
Right.
They're forced to stay at home with an abusive partner, an abusive parent, an abusive sibling.
Yeah.
And it's really problematic. There's a number of resources. There's hotlines that somebody could call asking for help anonymously.
Yeah.
I don't have them offhand, but I can send them to you to include in the description when we post the video here.
That would be great. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's just one of those things that, in a time where people can feel hopeless, that it's important to give hope wherever you can get it.
Yeah.
Wherever you can get it, wherever you can get it, because, this will pass. And we're already starting to see things starting to open up here in Pennsylvania. And little bit by little bit, looks like, what did they just say last night? June 4th is when they've extended our part of the state to be in the red zone. And hopefully it'll open up after that, and we'll see what happens. But
yeah,
one thing you mentioned too about the uncertainty that gives people more anxiety, frustration, anger. And what I'm starting to see, and I'm sure it's a result of people being pent up. And I can't watch cable news all but for so long. I find out what's going on and then I turn it off. I stick to, for me, just facts and figures so that I can make decisions, like you mentioned, and try not to get caught up in the propaganda of things, sensationalism of things. Well, from what I'm seeing, that the way that this seems to be affecting some people is that they're angry, they're frustrated. They want an enemy. That fight or flight response that you were talking about. Just naturally, people, it seems, are looking for someone or something to fight or fight against.
Right.
And may have some, energy or thoughts that are pointed in the wrong direction. Because it's hard to pause and look in the mirror. So it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. Not that there's not validity to the frustration, but to the degree that some people are taking these things is alarming at times, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And misplaced. So, if you could, so when you see people, or when you're talking to people that are getting these feelings, they're getting anxious, they're getting angry, they want to lash out. Your advice to them is to what?
Right. So, I mean, lots of different suggestions. Just a little bit of background of where I'm coming from. Most of my therapy training is experiential. So we do more than just talking in our interventions.
Right.
So for example, I might ask a client who's really frustrated and angry to write an FU letter to coronavirus. Rather than taking that anger out on your wife or society or the person who has a different political view than you, let's write a letter to coronavirus, because that's who you're really angry at right now.
Right.
Let's concretize it and give you, let's help you express your anger at the target rather than projecting it onto other people.
Right.
That can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
In one of my my social work class I was teaching, we did a role play between humanity and coronavirus, and had humanity speak the coronavirus at the start of this, and had coronavirus speak back to it, and we kind of walked this timeline into the future of whenever a cure or vaccine and treatment is found for this.
Right.
And it helped to personify it so that it could be addressed directly rather than it being this invisible thing out there. It's like you were saying, there's so much uncertainty with it. I mean, there's so much uncertainty to the point that I don't even know if I have coronavirus right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's on my desk here because I went out to the grocery store yesterday wearing these pants, or
yeah.
There's so much uncertainty about if you're immune to it after you get it. I mean, certainty really helps us feel secure.
Yes.
And there's a lot that could be said about certainty and trauma. I mean, in some research about trauma and disaster, they found that societies that knew who their enemy was when they were being attacked later presented with less PTSD than other groups who were being attacked but didn't know who the enemy was.
Right.
I think some of that research came out of Serbia. People were being attacked and they didn't know who was attacking them. Right. There was no way to properly direct the anger or the frustration or the sadness.
Right. Right.
So having being able to concretize the target can really help. There's also research about PTSD and political extremism, which is really interesting, especially right now.
Right.
It found that regardless of which side of the political spectrum and which side of an argument,
right,
everyone on the extremes, left or right, presents with higher rates of PTSD.
Right. Right.
Some of that research came out of Israel and Palestine, and they found far right on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, and the far left on the Israeli and Palestinian side. They both had experienced significantly higher rates of trauma and PTSD, which is really interesting considering what we're seeing now in Pennsylvania with the polarization politically around this collective trauma.
Yeah.
There was also a big research study published last month that was surveying people who were isolated and stuck at home. And it was confirming that people are, the results of the study were that the three biggest ways people were impacted by the stay-at-home orders. I'm pretty sure this was an international study, so this is not just in America, was they were experiencing classical PTSD symptoms. That's hyperarousal, being hypervigilant and looking over your shoulder, which maybe is a bit adaptive right now. That might help you not get the virus.
Right.
Intrusions and re-experiencing, that's flashbacks, nightmares. I can't tell you how many people around the world I've talked to that are having really crazy nightmares about coronavirus.
No.
Dissociation and avoidance. And negative thoughts, emotions, or beliefs about the world and about self. These are the classic symptom clusters of PTSD.
Yeah.
And it really looks like a lot of people are experiencing different aspects of that or all of it, and society as a whole seems to be manifesting them as well. There's large groups of people that are just avoiding and dissociating and detaching. Other large groups of people who are really hyper-aroused and hyper-vigilant. Other groups of people that are really stuck in negative emotions and beliefs. I would bet that trauma fuels conspiracy theories.
Sure.
And a lot of, because of the media, there's just this loop of re-experiencing and intrusive images that's, with classic PTSD, it's coming from inside. that negative image of that trauma I saw just keeps surfacing.
Mm.
But now it's happening on my computer and on my Facebook feed and on the news, and we're just constantly re-exposing ourselves to traumatic images, which, I mean, we need to be informed,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be done in a better way, I think, with some containment.
Containment.
Yeah.
Containment. And that's because I know for me, I literally have to discipline myself at times to put my phone down, because of the stimulus that it creates. You know, I mean, we're old enough to remember a time when we didn't have this, you know, and we didn't have that type of stimulation, you know, with our phones. And so we're fortunate for me to be able to remember that and say, you know what, I really don't need this right now. You know, I can put this down and go outside and I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to miss anything. But like you said, at a time when you're really desperate for stimulation, you know, for engagement, to like the neuroscience that you mentioned, for that type of activity and chemical reaction in your body and your brain, and you don't have it. And so you're looking for it wherever you can get it. And all of a sudden, all these negative things are being reinforced in your brain. And it's a really sick cycle that you can get on, you know, and is hard to break away from when you feel anyway that you're stuck in one place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really crazy because with my phone, right, I could expose myself to more vicarious trauma. I could use it to connect in a meaningful way and help with the feelings I'm having.
Mm-hmm.
I could use it to call a therapist or a supervisor and engage in teletherapy.
Right.
I could use it to dissociate and check out and just scroll on Facebook or watch videos for hours and hours.
Yeah.
It could be really useful right now for me, or it could be really harmful right now for me.
Yeah.
It just depends on how I'm using it.
How you're using it.
Yeah.
And I guess how you use it is determined by you know, where your head is, and maybe what you've conditioned yourself to being and doing up to that point.
Yeah. And I think a minute ago we mentioned containment.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm working with trauma, containment is one of the most important aspects of trauma work.
Mm-hmm.
That we're not overindulging in anything,
Mm-hmm.
or we're not diving into something too far,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not going to be able to come out of it in a safe way without re-traumatizing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's little things we can do with our phone to provide some containment for ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, the screen time feature is really useful.
Yeah.
I mean, we
Timer.
can create, the timer.
Yeah.
We can make commitments to each other. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
Chris, let's make a commitment together. For the next week, I'm not going to use my phone for more than X hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll check in a week from now
Mm-hmm.
and hold each other accountable for it. That doesn't
Right.
cost either of us anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of in this time, I mean, and nobody's perfect. I mean, a lot of the only ways that I know how to change behavior is by engaging in the wrong behavior for a period of time where it, you know, it makes things unmanageable. And I'm like, oh, I can't do that anymore, you know? So so then it's like, okay, can I humble myself to ask for some help and be willing to walk a different path? You know, it doesn't have to always come to disaster before you come to that point. But if you're sitting here in week 6 of this thing, and we're looking at another 3.5 weeks of, you know, somewhat of a similar situation, even though it's going to be warmer and some things are opening up. You know, not to say if you're not too far gone, you do have the emotional and mental capacity to make some decisions for yourself. There are ways that you can change your behavior and change your psychology through these next several weeks, like you're explaining. And that's really hopeful, but it's hard. Even like with working with like some athletes, you know, it's like, it's really hard to break behavior.
Right.
You know, it's really hard to discipline yourself to do things on your own when you don't have someone holding you accountable, like you said. not that, you know what I mean, or encouraging you to go in a different way.
Yeah.
And in a time when we can kind of isolate and get away from, you know, accountability almost, it's easy to drift. You know, it's easy to drift into that dark place for some people, you know? And so,
Sure.
you know, ultimately, I guess there's a lot left to the individual to make a decision, right?
Yeah.
To which way am I going to go here? What am I going to do? You know, am I going to sit? Am I going to, you know, be in this hole? Am I going to just sit still and wait it out? Or am I going to try to grow here? You know, and that's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I've noticed for myself internally about kind of that dynamic is,
Yeah.
as an introvert, I loved like the first month of this.
Right.
I mean, my career took off so much that I'm busy all the time, and I mean, I work with people all the time, but I'm an introvert and I really need time alone to not do anything and relax, or to write, or to read, or to, you know, just be by myself. That's how I recharge.
Right.
The first month of this, I loved it. I nearly wrote an entire textbook. I'm writing a textbook, and I probably wrote 150 pages in the first month of this.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoyed most aspects of, not everything. And then I really got hit with a wall of like, whoa, you know, feeling stuck, feeling like I just wanted to watch TV or binge watch Netflix or play video games and not do any work.
Yeah.
And I just kind of noticed the same dynamic in society that I was experiencing within myself around this pressure to be productive, or the pressure to make the best of this, or the pressure to grow from it even.
Right.
So I think it's tough because we need to have some sort of structure and containment in order to produce and grow and maintain health. And if there's too much of it, if we're too rigid about it, then it has the opposite effect, and it becomes more unhealthy.
Right.
And it causes other problems.
Yeah.
One of my favorite definitions of health comes from Dan Siegel, who's basically coined the term interpersonal neurobiology, which is this really exciting new field. And he says that health exists at the center of two extremes. One extreme is chaos, where there's no containment. Everything is just 100% expressed and chaotic, and anything goes. And the other extreme is rigidity, where there's too much structure and obsession, and everything it's too orderly. And that health exists in the center, where there's some structure and containment, but there's also space for creativity and spontaneity and playfulness, and not too much of either. That we're kind of in that, Aristotle called it the golden mean, right in the middle there.
I know that what I try to do is I'll go to the rigid phase. You know, I remember when I was a kid and, you know, I was a knucklehead and my life was out of control. The one thing I could do was fold all of my clothes in an orderly and color-coded fashion, you know, because at least something is orderly. You know what I mean? At least I can control something. But even today, you know, I'll do that. And like you said, for that first 30 days was sort of a batten down the hatches time for me and us. It's like, okay, we have kids, we have jobs, we have businesses. We're going to have lack of access to resources. What do we do? And it was necessary, you know. And what we started out, like you said, okay, we're going to do math in the morning, you know, in English, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And we could do that for a little while until we got to the point where we couldn't do it anymore. And being in that middle spot, like you said, I just had to get to the point where I accepted the circumstances and my own ability to manage this environment, and say that, you know, I can't lay on the couch all day. I'm not going to be Superman. And I have to allow myself time to be in the middle. I'm going to be tired sometimes. I'm going to be angry sometimes. I'm going to be these things. I'm not going to be able to, perform in my business the way that I typically can. And I have to accept that right now. I'm not going to be super dad the way that I'd like to be all the time. And I have to accept that too, and being all right, being in that space is, like you said, a key to being sane and happy during this time.
Right. Right.
It's hard. Yeah.
It's like just make the goal being good enough for right now.
Right. Right.
Be good
Right.
enough. That's what I was telling my students with their final paper coming up. We all have a lot going on right now, and you have all these other finals and the added stress of family and society and graduating and not knowing if you're going to be able to get a job the way things look right now. And I guess I have the benefit at my school, things are pass and fail, so they don't get number or letter grades. Just make your papers good enough.
Right.
Just good enough.
Yeah.
A psychologist, I think it was Donald Winnicott, who coined the term good enough, talking about being a good enough mother or a good enough parent.
Right.
Don't have to be the best. As long as you're good enough, then the child develops optimally.
There's a word I heard a few weeks back called our term productivity porn, and I love it because in my industry, there's so many there's so many positive thinking things and yay and all that kind of stuff, and an individual that isn't either seasoned or secure in themselves and where they are, can feel a lot of pressure to try to be something that they're not or that they're up for in the moment. And like you just mentioned, in a time like this, that's really dangerous. It really is, to try to stretch yourself. Not to say that you can't challenge yourself or, have a goal, like you said, and have a structure and challenge yourself to meet that structure. That in and of itself, in my opinion, is a huge success. To get through a day that way is a successful day. Doesn't have to be huge numbers on the board or whatever you think you should be doing. But just to navigate through a good day like that is a lot of success. And man, it's been a challenge for, not really a challenge. Well, yeah, at first a challenge for me to just let that thinking go. You're not going to be that now. Just be good for yourself and your family and the people you care about, and that's all right. That's good enough, like you said.
Yeah. I think we need to be gentle with ourselves here.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and with the people around us, I mean, everybody's under increased stress. I think we could safely say everybody, no matter who you are, where you're at, there's at least a little bit additional stress that you're experiencing because of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I mean, when we're overwhelmed with stress, we're much more likely to lash out with anger or to go into a fight response.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, be gentle with yourself. Take it easy.
Mm-hmm.
Be gentle with the people around you.
Yeah.
That could make this a whole lot more tolerable. And it's a lot easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's little things you can do, like yoga and meditation are incredibly helpful for tolerating stress and reducing stress and increasing one's threshold for stress. There's actually research on yoga and PTSD. They found that yoga was more helpful at reducing PTSD symptoms than any medication that's ever been researched.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about yoga or meditation, an element of the experience is learning how to tolerate the discomfort a little bit longer without taking action. Just noticing it, sitting with it, not doing anything. We're going to change the yoga pose in a minute. It's only going to hurt for a second longer. And I think what that does is it trains us to widen our threshold for discomfort a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more.
Mm.
It's one of the reasons why yoga and meditation are so useful for folks in recovery from addictions.
Yeah.
It's almost like I can increase my tolerance for stress, which reduces my likelihood of experiencing cravings or
Mm. That's
yeah.
incredible. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, with the physical element of yoga, and I mean, there's so many yoga, you can get free yoga classes on YouTube,
Yeah.
and all the yoga studios are doing online yoga classes.
Mm.
I mean, it's so accessible right now, and something you can do by yourself in your bedroom, or make it a social thing with whoever you're living with.
It's one of those things that you can do to create structure, you know,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
to get out of yourself. I mean, you mentioned creating structure because, as things start to loosen up and hopefully we can move around a little bit more, but the importance of creating structure in a day, I'm just kind of summarizing some of the things that you said, um, is so important to mental health, emotional health, and hope too, right? It's the uncertainty that can create so much uh, depression, anxiety, not knowing what's going to happen next. But if you can create some sort of structure within your day around the things that you can control, then that gives you a sense of purpose when you wake up each day, and you can maybe feel accomplished at the end of the day instead of drifting into never land and what's going to happen, when is this going to end, oh my god, I just saw this on Facebook, oh my god, I just saw this on the news, and then you're off to a very negative and sick place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned hope, which is so important.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, if you think about it on a large scale, I'm pretty sure society throughout history has survived much worse than this. I mean,
Yeah.
humans are amazingly resilient.
Yeah.
And when I'm working with my clients, they're all clients that have experienced severe trauma. So maybe it's easier for me to say this to them than a normal person, but I'll remind them, this is nothing compared to what you've already survived.
Right. Right.
You
Yeah.
lived through years and years of trauma and abuse and the aftermath of it. You can survive this. You've
Yeah.
survived much worse.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that doesn't apply to everyone, just the population I'm working with. And I mean, human beings are amazingly resilient. We
Yeah.
learn how to adapt, survive, and thrive under some of the worst conditions.
Hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things that has helped me is just to that is that, again, we're looking from March 14th to June 4th. I'm 42 years old. That's 2.5 months. Or whatever it is. It's going to be all right. Easy for me to say because you know I'm healthy. We're healthy. The people in the house are healthy. We have what we need for the most part. So I don't want to you know degrade anybody's struggle, but
Yeah.
through the course of a lifetime, it is really the blip it's a blip on the screen, and we will be able to move on. Um, but man, it should be. We don't know what's going to happen after this, socially in our society and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, the one thing that you can control is your environment, or to a certain extent, what you
Yeah.
do within your day, you can control those things.
Yeah.
And um, man, it's so easy to get distracted with the drama on your phone, the drama in the news, other people's opinions, to have misdirected, feelings and emotions and point them at a person, place, or thing, and really drive yourself crazy and make this already, traumatic experience even more traumatic for you. And you can drive yourself into a negative place, or you can kind of, like you said, just pause and say, I've had enough, and kind of go on a different path, if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, some other things that can be really helpful in kind of creating that pause and living with intention right now.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about is
Yeah.
slowing down, creating intention, creating structure,
Mm-hmm.
choosing who we want to be during the pandemic.
Right.
I mean, this is something all of us will be talking about for the rest of our lives. So one thing I asked myself was, when I talk about this 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the famous coronavirus pandemic of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
what do I want to be able to tell my students or my grandkids or my kids about what I did or didn't do during the pandemic?
Right.
And that thought really challenged me to stop just isolating myself and writing my book. And I started offering trainings and groups for mental health providers around vicarious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's therapists, doctors, nurses that are going to work every day, whether it's in a hospital or a treatment center or virtually,
Mm-hmm.
and all day, nonstop, they're working with not just the clients and the issues they used to treat, but now on top of that, the pandemic and the added stress.
Right.
And usually as a trauma therapist, I'm working with a client and we're talking about their trauma, not mine.
Right.
And I'm able to separate myself
Yeah.
to some degree.
Right.
But now my clients are like, Scott, how are you doing with the pandemic?
Yeah.
And I can't say I'm not experiencing the pandemic.
Right. Right. But you still have to like be together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a shared trauma, a trauma that my client's experiencing and I'm experiencing. So I think as healthcare workers, I was going to say conditioned to, but I think we chose the field because we're the type of people who put others' needs before our own, for better or worse. And I think there's going to be a real fallout a month or two from now when the prolonged stress of taking care of everyone else becomes too much for healthcare workers. So that's kind of where I see I could play a role by offering these trainings and these groups, just educating people on vicarious trauma, vicarious post-traumatic growth, that professionals grow from working with people that experience trauma.
Right.
And what that looks like and how it's defined so we can come to expect it or move towards it or
Right.
acknowledge it and celebrate it even.
Yeah. Yeah. That's important. I mean, to celebrate the success of going through a traumatic time or experience, and to show that it can be this way. You know, if you've gone through a traumatic experience, or you've gone through a tough time, you know, to be able to share that story with someone else, promote it, to give other people hope. You know, it doesn't have to, and maybe I shouldn't say that. I think, at least when I think of trauma, a lot of times I think of, um, you know, kind of shoulder slumped, can't move in a hole, you know, and that's not always the case. And so it's almost in the mind of a lot of people, especially mine, I can speak for myself, it's almost a bad word. You know, it's not something you want to admit. You know, it's not something you don't want to say that you're experiencing, that you're feeling it. You don't want to go there, you know, you kind of just whistle through the graveyard, you know, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, you know, and you're really not okay, you know, and it's all right to say that you're not okay. And I think it's important to be able to be comfortable to admit that, look, I'm not all right today. Like, Melissa and I have these conversations all the time. Like, I'm not all right today. I'm at my limit. It's it, you know, I got to disengage, you know, that's all I got on me today. You know, I got to go somewhere else. I got to drive for an hour and a half somewhere else, you know? And, but to admit that, I think allows you to, at least for me, to have some peace after the fact, and just allow myself to be like a complete person, like you were saying, you know, and then grow after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, nobody nobody could live any sort of life on this planet without experiencing at least a lowercase t trauma.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Everybody experiences difficulties and adversity.
yeah.
Um, it doesn't help to deny it or avoid it or act like it doesn't exist.
Right.
Um, one thing I've noticed is that seemed to have been the mentality of older generations, not to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, PTSD wasn't even recognized as a diagnosis until 40 years ago,
Right.
1980.
Oh my gosh.
But what I've noticed with the younger generations is almost the opposite, that
Yeah.
everything's labeled as trauma.
Right.
And
Right.
there's an unhealthy attachment to being a victim of trauma
Right.
that, um, like, it becomes part of one's sense of self in a
Right.
way that's really disempowering and not helpful. And it becomes
Right.
over acknowledged. You're
Right.
just repeating the same trauma story over and over again. Like, uh, maybe that's better than avoiding it because at least you've acknowledged it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but once it's acknowledged and I mean, it needs to be processed and the feelings expressed, and then something needs to change. Otherwise, we're just stuck in the same narrative, the same story. Um, one of my favorite quotes comes from Byron Katie, who she has this whole model about challenging belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "Who would you be without your story?"
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what would your life look like if you stopped attaching to the belief that you're traumatized? And it
Wow.
doesn't, whether you believe it or not, it doesn't change whether you experience trauma or not. I mean, that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that I'm not encouraging people to try to, distort their reality and believe that they didn't experience something they
Right.
right. But one could acknowledge they've experienced trauma or difficulty, notice how that trauma or difficulty has impacted them.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you experience trauma doesn't mean you have a traumatic response to it.
Mm-hmm.
3 out of 4 adults cope with it, overcome it, grow from it, and
Mm-hmm.
don't experience post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can change our narrative going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the 3 common ways that people grow from trauma, post-traumatic growth, is a changed sense of self. After experiencing that, I realize I'm a lot stronger than I thought I was.
Right.
I'm more resilient than I thought I was.
Right.
Or if I handled that, I could handle just about anything.
Yeah.
A changed sense of self. Second one is a changed sense of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe after experiencing this pandemic, I realize how important relationships are to me.
Yeah.
When this is done, I'm going to invest a lot more time and energy into my relationships.
Right.
And the third one is a changed sense of life philosophy.
What was that again, Scott?
A changed philosophy on life and the world.
Okay. Right.
So maybe for some people that looks like increased religious or spiritual investment.
Mm-hmm.
And because so much of trauma comes at the hands of other humans, a lot of trauma survivors really find hope and inspiration in the spiritual and religious realm.
Right.
And for other people, maybe it's more existential, about meaning or purpose in life.
Mm-hmm.
And for others, it's as simple as after experiencing that difficulty, new possibilities are available to me.
Right.
Like you said, I could help someone else with this experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those are the 3 larger domains of post-traumatic growth.
I think we should end it right there, man. That summarized it really well. Kind of we're at a time, like I said, I know I sound like a broken record, but we're there's light at the end of the tunnel, as far as the calendar goes. And, people have choices to make and ways that they can respond. This has been really good, man. I feel like I got an hour of free therapy from you. So I stole from you. Secretly, that's why I wanted to do this, because I need help. So I called you up.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. I appreciate it.
Well, before you do jump off, I know that in the bio, I put your bio in there. I put your business information, but go ahead and say what the name of your organization is and where you are and your phone number and all that stuff, how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, you can tell I'm more of a therapist or a teacher than a marketer or a business guy.
Yeah.
So my practice is called the Phoenix Center for Experiential Trauma Therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And our primary office is in Media, Pennsylvania, and we have another office in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Yep. Mm-hmm. Right now, everything is online, so we're providing teletherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Phoenix I chose the name based on the Phoenix as a symbol of post-traumatic growth.
Yep.
That we're primarily working with trauma, loss, and addiction, but our namesake holds the vision of growing after trauma.
Yes.
Right. So we're taking new clients for teletherapy. I have 4 or 5 therapists that work at the center.
Mm-hmm.
We work mostly with adults, but also with adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have 2 groups that are currently running online. Mm-hmm. One of them is a experiential trauma therapy group with all genders. Mm-hmm. And the other one is a new women's group for trauma and ambiguous loss.
Mm-hmm.
Ambiguous loss is the loss we experience not when somebody dies, mm-hmm. but when a relationship changes, or when we don't entirely lose something, but we lose the way something used to be.
Right.
It's a different type of loss, and we're all experiencing ambiguous loss right now.
Right. Yeah.
So if someone wanted to get in contact with us, they could go on our website, which is phoenixtraumacenter.com. Mm-hmm. You could shoot me an email at scott@phoenixtraumacenter.com, or you could call our main number, which is 484-440-9416.
And all that info will be posted underneath this, so everybody can get in touch with you. Dr. Scott gave me an hour of free therapy. Dropped jewels on us, and man, this was good, man. I'm really glad you could do it. It's been a pleasure. And more personally, it's just been a pleasure to watch you grow in your career, and I know that you're really passionate about it. And I love watching people do what they love to do and really grow within it. And, in my opinion, for what you do, people are called to do it. It's not, you are what you are. Like for instance, my mom was a nurse. I couldn't imagine her being anything else. It's just in her nature to be a nurse. I really feel like this is your nature, and you're living in yourself. It's really cool to watch. It's inspiring to see. So that's my plug for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I think we have a lot in common in that we both are very passionate about what we do, and the work we've been doing seem to explode and grow on parallel paths at the same time even.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It's been exciting watching your path unfold, and thanks again for helping us buy the house.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I'll help you buy the next one when the time's ready.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Scott.
Thanks, Chris.
See ya.
Take care.